I want to bring you today another build for the Psyker class. This time using mostly the Shockwave skill. It can be channeled during movement, so combined with the teleport skill of the Ether Blade, we get an amazing build for speed farming. Also, you can use many of the items I included in my updated Pyromancer build.
He deserved worse, much worse.
We won 15 points in force. We are always at max warp heat, so we get 25% damage bonus. And we are using warp damage, so we get another 20%. 20 points in resilience for defensive stats. And 25 points in Psi focus for the cooldown reduction and the chance for beneficial warp anomalies. Our first perk is temporal efficiency. We are using an Empyrean armor with the time warp skill, mainly to get the buff from this perk. The supreme cooldown reduction helps us to trigger our shockwave much more often. Our second perk, Blessing of St. Victorious, so we can survive high level missions much easier. And the last perk, Mind Rift 2, since we are always in unhinged warp state, we get 90% damage bonus with this one. We are always at max warp heat, so we want good defenses. When buffs are up, they get even higher. Try to get crit chance in the 30s and crit strength over 46. Lastly, get a good amount of cooldown reduction, so when the perk is on cooldown, we still have decent casting times. As you can see, the time warp skill from our armor has a cooldown of 43 seconds, but the duration of the temporal efficiency perk is only 30 seconds. That's why we wanna have still a decent amount of cooldown reduction. Here we get our enrich tokens. Our main attack is AoE, so boost it whenever possible. We also have our shock and slow debuff source here. Next, on our eye implant, we boost our enrich token damage and also boosting our crit by a lot, and we get more AoE damage. I chose the main implant of Wrath to increase our enrich tokens, socket here AoE damage and effectiveness. As an alternative, you can use this relic main implant with the damage per enrich token enchant. Here you can get more attributes and you can also roll supreme crit chance on it. Since we are using a melee weapon, we get shield drain, so this enchant will be very useful to keep our suppression up. Here we can get also a lot of defenses and cooldown. Psychic focus, so we get another spell slot. The fear in 5 meter is very useful, since we teleport with our Ether Blade around, we can go easily in close range and apply it. And with that enchant we can also apply general vulnerability immediately. If you wanna understand it better, you can check out my advanced player guide. Try to get first suppression on hit, the effectiveness to vulnerabilities, and the fear effectiveness. Later get the chance to fear on hit, so targets that are further than 5 meters away can still get feared. Lastly, get the chance to use the inoculator for free. Socket the same as before. Get any Empyrean armor, so when we use the time warp, we get the buff. I recommend getting this enchant later on. The invulnerability from the Rosarius force field will be very useful. For the other enchants, just roll defensives, and for secondary roll supreme crit chance. For Psalm Doctrine we use this one. With this inoculator we get a lot of suppression damage reduction. Here you can also get more attributes. The cooldown on kill enchant is very important, and the free use chance is good as well. Socket the same as before. I slot in Blood Balm, 2 Psychons and 1 Holdfast. For our weapon, I choose the Telekinetic Rod for the knockback and knockdown ability. Since we are always at max warp heat, we get a good amount of damage increase with this enchant. Here try to get first crit chance and effectiveness. And for our Psalm Doctrine, socket in warp damage bonus. Our other weapon is the Ether Blade for the teleport skill. I chose this enchant so we get more Rosarius force fields. If you think you have enough survivability, you could exchange it for another damaging enchant. Get first shield and life drain, then crit chance and strength, and socket here more warp damage. The first signum gives damage per enrage token. Get crit chance, strength and cooldown first. Our second signum is the one that gives us general vulnerability, which we easily apply with our fear aura. Also get crit chance, strength and cooldown reduction first here. For our secondary weapon, use any staff so we can apply buffs here. Max out the AoE tree for the damage bonus and the cooldown reduction we get here. 3 points in psychic debuffs so we can get armor piercing, and we have a way to apply vulnerabilities. 3 points in psychic combat so we can modify our buffs. Max out the crit tree. In the support tree, we get more cooldown reduction for our Shockwave, and we get more HP gain. The debuff tree, we get damage bonus here, some damage reduction here if we're using the telekinetic rod, and more crit chance here. In the movement tree, get the points until you get this one and this one, so we get a good amount of cooldown reduction. The 5 points here aren't necessary, you can put them wherever you want. I made a Radical Psyker, so I can use the skills from the Radical Path tree. Here we get more warp damage. With this one we can transform the damage from our Fury Aura into warp damage, and this one is also nice to have. I put 4 points in the health tree. Here we can get some suppression and more health gain. Lastly, the defense tree, so we can survive better in the unhinged warp state. Constrict will be our single target boss killer. It deals massive damage when the enemy has no suppression. Socket effectiveness, armor piercing and cooldown. Shockwave is our main skill. Keep channeling it to clear normal enemies, and on bosses use it to drain suppression, and when it's low use Constrict to deal massive damage. Socket here armor piercing, vulnerability, so we have a way to apply warp vulnerabilities, and cooldown. Lastly, the dome for the supreme damage reduction. Socket cooldown and duration, so we can keep it up longer, and effectiveness. Our first buff is Fury Form. It helps us to apply on-hit effects, gives us another 20% base damage bonus, and 15% supreme heat resist. Socket effectiveness, supreme warp resist, and base damage bonus. Our second buff is endurance, to increase our max HP and HP regeneration. Socket effectiveness, supreme warp resist, and more base damage. Our last buff is this one, so we have one death protection. Here socket cooldown reduction, base damage, and movement speed. If you want, you can use precognition. It doesn't count as a buff and gives you a free energy shield. Now let's have a look at a plus 18 mission.
The web of heresy and corruption is spun by powerful beings and perverted minds. Hunt their leaders, and this construct of evil will come crashing down. You set a fine example for their kind,